Welcome to Zen and the Art of Real Estate Investing. What if you could learn from experienced real estate investors, find out what got them to where they are now, get insight into their daily habits, and take these insights to inspire your own growth? Each week, Jonathan Green shares an in-depth look at the mindful approach to real estate investing. Jonathan is a real estate investor, advisor, and coach, as well as the founder of Streamlined Properties and the team leader of Streamlined Properties on Market, brokered by eXp Realty. Whether you are looking to start from scratch, get to the next level, or just a straightforward and honest approach to real estate investing, Jonathan seeks to provide a free mentorship program you can take with you anywhere. Now, here's Jonathan.
Welcome back to another week of Zen and the Art of Real Estate Investing. Before we get to our amazing guest for this week, I just want to remind you, that normal podcast upkeep. Follow, subscribe, write 5-star reviews. You know the drill. But honestly, it really does help us. We're trying to scale up the business charts and catch some of the podcasts to see if we can get to the top of the charts eventually. We need your support to do that. I personally would really appreciate it. This week, my guest is Shannon Robnett, 27 years in the business, 5 generations of real estate professionals in his family. We're going to talk to you about vertical integration and vertical equity in real estate. You're going to hear all about it right now. This is episode 47 of Zen and the Art of Real Estate Investing with my guest, Shannon Robnett. Shannon has been in the industry for 27 years. He's been involved from start to finish on over $350 million in construction projects, which cover a large amount of different assets: multifamily, professional office buildings, city halls, fire, police stations, pretty much everything. Shannon, welcome to the show. It's great to meet you.
Thanks, Jonathan. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, so let's start at the beginning. I think from what I've read in our pre-call that the real estate bug came from your dad. Is that correct?
Yeah, both my parents were involved in real estate. My mom got a real estate license in 1980 and opened a brokerage. My dad was a general contractor in California, moved to Boise, Idaho in 1980. And so I was forced labor for a long time. And, site cleanup and lawn landscaping and all that kind of stuff. And I thought I was going to go to college, but I realized that they wanted me to show up all the time. I had these assignments to do. And so I went back into real estate, started building houses, realized I didn't like homeowners. So I really switched over to the commercial side and really pursued my passion through commercial real estate for the last probably 25 of those 27 years.
Yeah, but that's an interesting lesson that I think a lot of people have to learn. The residential end, was it too much client facing for you?
Yeah.
Too many problems, right?
Yeah. And the reality is you do things in your home that you wouldn't do in your office or in your industrial warehouse. And the same is true with multifamily versus industrial. Your client turnover is much less in industrial. Your client interaction is much less. They want a place to weld stuff together or build kayaks or whatever it is. They're not complaining because the hot water hasn't worked for 4 minutes.
Yeah, and your build costs are way down, so you can build more and probably much more efficiently because of the way industrial complexes are built.
Yeah, you're definitely less on your build cost. Your build timeline is less, so your concept to delivery is a much shorter period of time. It's a much easier process. Tenants want 4 walls, a bathroom, and a couple of offices in industrial. And the other thing is, the beauty of that is the triple net in the lease. So if costs go up for you, costs go up for them, and they understand that because they're business people.
Yeah. And then they're getting in better than a traditional structure. Some companies had looked originally, I don't know, you've been in it for a long time, but there were a lot of companies that were in more traditional office environments and then realized, why don't we just do this in industrial spaces? We're not like a pretty organization. We don't need fancy tables and everything. So have you seen a big change of what's going into industrial complexes?
Where we're at, we like a lot of the owner user, smaller business type stuff, the 3 to 10,000 square foot tenant. I think the world's a pyramid, right? There's how many billionaires versus millionaires, right? And then there's the rest of us folks. But when I look at it, I go, man, I can get a lot more 3 to 5,000 square foot tenants. The majority of businesses in the United States are small businesses.
Yeah.
And so I've really focused on that area and we've had a lot of success. And, the reality is they'll also pay a little bit of a premium on the space. So your rents versus costs tend to be a little bit higher with that small space.
Yeah, and the industrial kind of caters to people who need taller spaces. You can fit trucks into a lot of
Yeah,
industrial. Getting in and out is easier for those type of business, which does allow them
absolutely.
to pay that premium.
Yep. I've got a virtual reality company in one space. I've got a gelato ice cream guy in a space. Everything you can imagine: karate dojos, golf cart
Yeah,
sales, electricians, cabinet makers, all kinds. And one of the very first buildings I built for myself in 2001 was a 10,000 square foot building. And I got a couple of tenants that still, 21 years later, are still there. They've literally, those guys have paid off their section of the building. I almost feel like I need to take them a piece of the title or something
yeah.
to say,
But
but
that
you
shows
know,
over the long haul that you made the right decision on building that type of building. And then
yeah.
obviously it works for the tenants long term.
And when you look at what people do with businesses, they're not necessarily as concerned about they move farther away, but they don't want to move their business because their clients know it and the suppliers know it. And moving a business is much easier than somebody packing up their cinder block entertainment center and heading down the street because they get $50 off on the rent.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Wow. So going back to just the beginning to get back to the start as well, what things did you learn about real estate that you thought you were going to just from watching your parents from two different sides, construction and then the agent side gives you a good full spectrum of real estate as a kid. But what was it that really started to click for you? This is going to be good money.
My father retired at 50 with cash flow. I grew up thinking we were poor, not middle class poor, because my parents they lived the adage dirt poor. They had everything in their dirt. They had everything in buildings and they built a lot and they were very frugal and they made sure that they made investments that made money. And that was their focus. And I saw that start to come to fruition with them. And I thought, man, this is the way to do it, right? Because my dad is now 74 years old, hasn't worked, hasn't built another building in 24 years.
Yeah.
And you know what? His income is inflation adjusted. So he's making a lot more than he was in 2002, but it's because of the tenants. And so his price of chicken is the same dollar denominated thinking
Yeah.
because his rent is now 2.5 times what it was then.
Yeah. You find a lot of the old school philosophy similar. My dad similarly also was that millionaire next door philosophy. Like
Right.
you don't really need to show off a ton of stuff. Some people like cars, but I think like do you like everything? Or do you just not have to tell everybody about what you have, which is
Right.
different than today because you go on the internet now and everybody is saying they have 100 doors and you're like, you don't have 100 doors. Like it's such a different time.
And I think it comes back to how hard it was to make the money. I think when we look at, what my dad and your dad put into making a dollar and saving the money to have the down payment in the struggle of the vacancies, all of those kinds of things. And now you got people that they're making great money in tech. They're 25 years old, 26 years old. The money is easier to make for them than it was for my parents. So it's easier for them to spend it, right? And when you work for 25 years, or my dad's case, 27, 28 years, to really get to a place where you don't have to work tomorrow, then it's hard to spend it. Where a lot of these kids are like, hey, I'm making 300 grand a year. My rent's $4,000. I can afford to live this lifestyle. This is easy. I've always had it this way. And maybe that's a little difference in the philosophy of how they view the money.
Yeah. And I think just access to real estate is so much easier now in general because you could just go
Yeah.
on the internet and flip through and find everything that you want. Where our parents my dad used to just go to the courthouse. He knew the clerk. We'd get the foreclosure list and we would go look at him. Nobody else knew other than like the 3 or 4 other investors in the town. When your mom was an agent, people were still coming in to look through the MLS was a book.
I remember that. I was just thinking that. That's why I was smiling, because it was
Yeah.
a book and it had 2 pictures in it.
Exactly.
You had a client that really wanted to spend some money when they got the 3-picture or the 4-picture layout, and they were terrible black and white pictures. And the book was printed every 2 weeks. And I'm just sitting there going, now I get an update of anything listed in a certain area that's a certain size that I wanted to see, and I don't even have to put any effort into it.
Now
And
you
there's
can.
thousands of people selling that list from the courthouse steps. So you
Yeah.
can go online and say, sell me the list, and they'll sell you the list from anywhere. you
Yeah,
know?
exactly. I remember back then, I started buying my own places in about like 1991-ish. And I would go with agents and you can see that agents would make mistakes then because they didn't even know. They were just like, it was just a piece of paper. So we go and I'm like, oh, this is disgusting.
Yeah.
Now that you have no excuses for making
We
That
better stop dating ourselves, John.
yeah, I know. Maybe it's just our beards. I don't know.
We're going to start sounding like the two guys on the Muppets.
Yeah, we'll get back to some younger activities. So now you're doing a lot of ground up development. Are you doing that in industrial or also in all sorts of different things? Because I saw city halls, fire, police stations, schools.
I was a design build contractor, and I saw where I could do this and I could create the value for the other people because I could bring their vision to life. And then I just kind of said, why am I not doing this for myself? And so we do a lot of ground up industrial. We do a lot of ground up multifamily. And the reality is at the end of the day, we're creating that value. So we are the original value add. When people talk about coming in and repainting and that stuff, that's great. We're building apartment complexes right now that there's about a 25 or 30% margin in from the cost through the valuation with the tenants in it. So, all of that work, all of that stuff, but it's a 4-year grind from the day you tie up the property to the day you're opening your doors for your tenants.
Yeah, that makes sense. And those are two different philosophies. It's long-term, short-term. And a lot of newer investors are really focused on the short-term. And because they didn't grow up like we did, understand that it's a long-term game. Do you think that's helped you in the contracting phase, though? Because then you can really explain to people like, look, you're not getting this return tomorrow. If you want to get this extra return, you're going to have to wait it out with us and trust us.
I wish it was easy to explain stuff. What I use is I put cameras on my website for all my job sites, so you can see it being built and you can see that, hey, look, there's guys running around, but not a lot happened today. And then all of a sudden you see the slab go down and you go, oh, wow, a lot happened today. But I think like the value add, people understand that when we buy this, we've got work to do till we get a return. And so we have those conversations. We're also buying cash flowing industrial because there's opportunities for that in the market that's currently existing. And so we like that as well. But we're really, because of my long history in the business and everything, we're really able to diversify, and I wouldn't say necessarily be nimble, but we understand multiple asset classes. The only difference between buying a stabilized or a partially stabilized industrial project and building one is about 9 to 12 months. A lot of the other parts and pieces are the same. And so to be able to understand the asset class, to be able to understand the underlying market is really where the work needs to be done. And once you have those two down, then you can alternate back between building or buying.
Yeah. Is there any asset or asset class that's out there right now that you're just like, that's not for me? Or that you would steer people away from, like in today's economic climate?
Honestly, I think there's not a lot of value left in value add multifamily.
Large scale.
Yeah. With the interest rates rising, cap rates coming back to where normal is, there's still product out there, but there's a disconnect between buyers and sellers as to what it's really worth. Sellers are hanging on to 21 prices. Buyers are wanting 17 prices. And there's just a disconnect. And I think there's a deal to be had in every asset class. A year and a half ago, we bought an office building that was mostly vacant and all original 1980. We've completely refurbished it. We're re-tenantizing it. We've got some great activity. We're putting in a Regis office and a few other things. So as long as you have a plan and the actual ability to execute, I think that you can be optimistic about a lot of things, but it's got to come back to, does it fundamentally cash flow? And I think a lot of people in the last couple of years have gotten into the appreciation mindset that I'm going to buy this, we're going to value add it, we're going to add $200 to the rent, and it's going to go from 40 million to 50 million, and we're all going to make money. And they never thought through the what if we don't sell it in 2 years. What does my 7-year plan look like for this thing? Where's my exit really at if something changes fundamentally in the market? The one thing that I do know, Jonathan, is that real estate changes. That's all it really does, right? This section of town grows faster than this section. You've got a large scale employer come to town and now you're short on this product. The lending rates change, cap rates. I've never seen cap rate compression like we've seen. And my history tells me don't underwrite like that.
Yeah.
And yet we see a lot of that stuff happening. And there's a lot of this that's 07 and 08 where a lot of people were jumping into real estate that probably shouldn't have.
Yeah.
They're going to do just like they did with their Tesla stock. They're going to buy it when it's 2 weeks away from the peak and sell it when it's 2 weeks away from the bottom in disgust. And you're seeing a lot of that stuff happen. But I think if people would readjust their window on real estate to a 5-year minimum, they would do way better than what they ever thought because they're going to get consistent results. Real estate market is cyclical, it moves, but it doesn't ever stay anywhere for too long.
Yeah, so many good points in there. One, we just had Ashley Wilson from Bar Down on, and she said the exact same thing. She said that the differential between seller and buyers was like still about 15% on these large scale multifamily. Like they're just not connecting, exactly like you said. I agree with that as well. And then also, I think this goes to what we were talking about before, old money, new money, how to invest. That 5-year cycle is really important because we always say, those of us who've been in the game for a while, you don't understand investing unless you've been through a full cycle with a down cycle, because you don't know how to get through it.
Butt kicking, right?
Yeah, you got to get your teeth kicked in a little bit to understand, hey, you can still get out the other end if you're diversified. And like you said, you understand the assets and when they're going to come back. Those are really great points. And now's an interesting time. Like you said, the valuations are a little bit off, but I still agree with you as well. I think there's deals everywhere. It just depends if you personally are nimble enough to watch the markets and understand. That's why some people who maybe just invest in syndications or new money, they're not looking at the full package. We just saw like a $290 million default in Houston. And it's exactly for what you said. They were counting, buying in the high part and then saying, well, it's never going to go down. And then a lot of different things happen to make it go south.
And when you look at the timing on that last asset that he bought, it's questionable whether or not he ever even made a payment on it.
Yeah,
right?
I agree.
This thing didn't cash flow from day one. They were looking at huge upside appreciation. And when you go from the feeding frenzy that we had, where everybody was buying and it was, I don't ever do call for offers. And because that's a bloodletting session, right? The guy that wins went the thinnest on his margin and better have the deepest pockets, but rarely did, because those with the deep pockets pulled back at the second round. Right?
Exactly. Great point. Yeah, because they know better. Right. So
the seller did great. The guy down the street's now going, well, if his is worth that, mine's worth this. So then the market goes up another notch and there's another new guy running headlong into the charge, only to be met with machine gun fire and angry tenants. So.
Yeah, and that's just the first domino and all the dominoes that are going to go down, because once that turns, then everybody realizes, oh, crap, like we weren't all worth that. It's because they didn't know their markets, or they were intentionally operating on not fixed numbers, but inflated numbers that we all knew were inflated. But you can't ride those out. You still have to be looking at the asset.
There's a term for that, Jonathan. It's called pencil whipping your spreadsheet.
I like it.
Tell me we're making money. Tell me we're making money. And you keep changing numbers, and pretty soon you could sell that at a cap 1.
Yeah.
And man, look at all the money we make. But there's the reality of what practically happens. And I was talking with a gentleman the other day who has a $3 billion portfolio, and he's looked at 35 deals and didn't even get past the napkin sketch on any of them. You know, and he bought one asset in 22. That's passing on a lot. If he's got $3 billion in real estate, and he also just did 2 cash-in refinances, right?
Yeah.
So people aren't prepared for that, and without the dry powder and the experience, there's nothing but panic in the air.
Yeah, of course. And I think the most effective negotiation strategy in all of real estate is the ability to walk away. And those, like you said, in the round 2, the good investors they're taking it out. They know that deal's too hot and somebody's coming in. We see that all the way down to just regular on-market residential right now. People are just doing crazy stuff in markets near me, and we're looking at it like it's going to have an effect sometime. You can't win houses $800,000 over asking in a market and think that's sustainable.
Wow.
Yeah.
I have a piece of land that's come back. They were at $3 million. I was at 2.7 just in January, so just 4 months ago. And since then, with interest rates continuing to rise, cap rate spread going up, they've dropped that now to 2.3, and it pencils worse now than it. And my DSCR has gone up, so now I got to bring more equity to the table. Not a bad thing, but it lowers your returns because you're not using bank leverage at a fixed rate. And when all that stuff starts to happen, it's just, I can give you 2 now. When they're like, what happened to 2.7? And I'm like, the market
should have taken it then. Yeah.
But
that shows that you're paying attention to all facets of the market, because it does. I see why they said that, but that's just an indication that they're grasping for something too late. You should have seen as a seller the cycle coming. Sure, now that 2.7 sounds good, but that's why I'm at 2 now.
And that we saw the same thing happen in 9, 10, and 11 as the market continued to dry up with liquidity. Thank goodness we don't have that right now where there's plenty of liquidity, right? Banks have raised their standards, but come on, Jonathan, you're going to loan me $100 million and I got to put 40% of my own money in it. What's wrong with that scenario? People got used to putting 15% down and the bank stepping in for the balance and funding the value add. But that was on bridge loan stuff that's all coming due. And now they're seeing the downside to, oh my gosh, I bought it at 30. I borrowed another 4 to do the rehab. I'm at 34 now. And what do you mean the asset value's at 22, 24? Right. And they don't have the ability to cover that gap.
Yeah. So in terms of where you've been, you're located in Boise. Are all of your investments around in Idaho, that area, or have you branched out all over the place now as well?
Yeah, we've got deals in Washington, Texas, Florida. I'm leaving on Wednesday to go check out a deal in Nashville, Tennessee. I'm like you said, I have the ability to walk away from my own market, right? With the influx of Californians, we've become an appreciation market, so it's very hard to cash flow.
Yeah.
And I'm not really keen on building an $80 million apartment complex, hoping somebody will buy it at 90 or 100.
Right.
I need to be able to build that and be able to rent it and create cash flow. And if I can't do that at the end of the day, I'm going to have a real hard time jumping into that breach because I just don't see the exit. I have to have an exit. I have to have multiple exits.
Yeah. Boise has been one of those markets. I think if you look at Arizona and what Open Door and the iBuyers did, just killing that market, that didn't happen in places like Boise and Salt Lake, but Boise and Salt Lake and those areas are talked about. And they were number one on the list for hottest markets to invest in. But now this year, it's like, okay, just like you're saying, especially for large scale, what are you going to get? You have to really be able to wait now because the prices got pushed up so high. Go ahead.
Yeah, and Boise's been on everybody's top 10 list for 20 years, but we were just the number 6 number 6 city in the nation to start a business in as far as ease.
Yeah.
The top 4 cities were in Florida, and it has everything to do with regulation. We've got strong job growth. Our median household income in Boise went from $73,000 pre-COVID to $94,000 during COVID. Wow. And if you're going to sway a city who's demographically bound to it's about 350,000 people inside city limits. If you're going to sway that by $20,000 a household, you're going to bring in a lot of $300,000 jobs. You're going to bring a lot of telecommuters. You're going to bring in a lot of retirees that have funds. And so by doing that, we've created a lot of well-paid ancillary jobs.
Yeah.
And when I look at growth markets like that, Nashville's doing that. Raleigh, North Carolina is doing that. Have they peaked? Quite possibly. But the underlying fundamentals are that you're doing this. And in our greater MSA of 850,000 people, we brought in 42,000 people in 22. We as a state, not by percentage, not by actual people, we are the fastest growing state and have been for the last 3 years because of we're not large, right? 1.8 million people. We got 60,000 people show up in the state. You can spot most of them, right? Especially when it snows. They're the ones in the ditch, right?
Yeah. They don't know.
No. And so when you look at that, you have to underwrite the market first. I see people going, oh, I'm looking at a deal in Little Rock, Arkansas. What do you know about Little Rock? I'm going to look at the 5-mile radius. 6 miles away might be a nuclear site. Yeah. You don't know that. You need to know what the underlying fundamentals are, where the job's coming from. If you look at cash flow, there's some really excellent deals cash flowing in Detroit.
Yeah. There's a reason that they're cash flow deals.
But there's no growth.
Yeah, I agree. High cash flow deals are usually low to no appreciation and high capex. And that's where the same investors that we're talking about, let me get 10 of those. And then they don't realize that they're going to do the capex and never have a profit for 20 years because that was just waiting for them there. That's why it was cash flowing so well.
Yeah. And that's the guy that's marketing the midnight program. They probably don't do that anymore because you can't get those infomercials on Netflix.
Yeah. There's other variations on social media.
Yeah. And that's the other thing that I think a lot of people do, like my journey, is they start with single family and then they move to the larger assets because there's value in the scale. Yeah. There's value in, even if you're not the GP, if you're an LP in a 100,000 square foot industrial park, you're probably going to fare a lot better than if you're the owner of a duplex and trying to do everything yourself. Yeah. And I think a lot of people fail to realize that every aspect of real estate that you take on is you buying a job. The more passive you are, the higher your return per hour spent versus being the guy that changes out the water heater on the Saturday.
Yeah. I think a lot of people are in investing at some point are ego driven. So they're like, I can handle it. And maybe you can, but what's your life going to look like if you're trying to handle 90 units as a manager yourself when you haven't done that before?
And then the reality is when you go to sell, are you at the top of the market? Are your units in tip-top shape? I've watched people save thousands and lose millions because they've managed it themselves. So they're not paying, I'm not paying 7% to a property manager. Okay, if your rents are down 4, you go that on the multiple of a cap rate, and it's astronomically different. You know?
And those are the ones where the repairs come in real hot on the due diligence phase because they're cheap. They were trying to cut it and look good for them. They don't up the rents over time. Oh, sure, just keep it. The units are in bad shape. And you're handing over, that's part of the differentiation now, your 15 to 20% difference between what a seller thinks it's worth and what a buyer thinks it's worth, because they looking at an area and not a quality.
And that's where I think that the more people are involved in real estate or probably anything. I've never been in the tech space, so I don't know. I've never been in the automobile industry, so I don't know. But the more people are involved in real estate, the more they realize that being active in real estate can be as simple as buying the asset, putting it with a property management company, and collecting checks. And in a lot of cases, your ROI per hour is huge compared to what it is if you do all the steps in between, because then all you did was buy a job.
Yeah.
I talk to people that do Airbnb all the time, and I'm just astounded at the amount of hours that they put into that, and all they want to focus on is the return. Right?
Yeah. They're not counting the time. Yeah. They have 90 hours a week just fixing the photos and dealing with the complaints.
We just bought a $6.7 million asset in Houston, and I probably don't have 40 hours in the deal between my whole staff with all of the underwriting, with the lending, with everything, because everything is professionally, we've got a packet of all our lending stuff. We send that out.
Yeah.
We've got all the due diligence stuff. We get that checklist in. We were working with really professional realtors on the seller side, so they knew what we needed. They had all that ready for us, and we were able to just walk that through. We bought the asset. It's now sitting on the shelf sending checks, and our ROI on our time invested is really solid. Now with that 90 hours, I can go look at 2 or 3 or 4 more deals and make better choices because I'm not scampering between, oh, shoot, I didn't have time to do my due diligence because I had to run over here and let Susie in because a lock wasn't working on her Airbnb or whatever the case may be. And I missed a couple things in the crawl space.
Yeah.
This week's episode of Zen and the Art of Real Estate Investing is brought to you by my investor-friendly real estate team, Streamline Properties on Market, brokered by eXp Realty. I have more than 30 agents on my team, and we are investor-friendly. We work traditional buyers and sellers, but we also focus on investors. So whatever your investor needs are in the state of New Jersey, parts of Pennsylvania, parts of New York, and a small part of Nevada, we have you covered, as our goal is to figure out first what your investment needs are, and then how we can help you reach them. Let's get back to the show.
We've talked a lot on other podcasts. I'm sure you would agree with this. The commercial space is so much different than residential, especially when you're buying large scale. There's not a lot of fish in the sea for buyers because sellers of large commercial assets want to deal with closers. So if you've closed before, you have leverage to close pretty much any deal that you want if you're a known quantity. Has that made it easier for you over these 27 years? The more assets you've acquired and turned or built and shown gives you much easier option to say, oh, I want to take on this value add industrial. And they can say, yeah, you build industrial and you've bought industrial, we'll just sell to you. And you're going to do fair due diligence instead of a newbie due diligence, which is freaking out about all the wrong things.
And the other thing about that, Jonathan, on my journey, I had to learn what the expectation was of me, right? When you're BlackRock, your name walks in the door about an hour before you do. Right?
Yeah, correct.
But when you're Shannon Robnett out of Boise, Idaho, so on this deal in Houston, I said, hey, let me contact the lender because we're doing an assumption on this loan. Let me contact the lender and let's go ahead and spend a little bit of time with him while we're negotiating this LOI. And so I literally forwarded the lender my whole package. It's got my tax returns. It's got my W-2s. It's got all the 1099s. It's got my balance sheet. It's got my bank accounts, All of my records are there. And when the lender gets that whole package, gets his whole checklist right there, he goes, I'm dealing with the pro, right? I'm dealing with the guy that knows what he's doing. And to be honest, that's not me. I got great people that work with me that keep us looking professional.
But that's why it is you, though. You know what I mean? Yeah, that's exactly it. You set it up the same for due diligence and everything else. You make sure you hire out and get the stuff done.
Yeah, because you can't afford not to. If I'd have been sending in 23 emails of different things and, oh yeah, I forgot that, and my global cash flow statement it's not correct and it's not accurate, and they catch these things, then they'll dive deeper. And then they'll dive deeper, and they keep peeling back the onion. They think there's something wrong in here. And when you're looking professional and you're coming across and you're going, you know what? Here's a very clean offer. I don't have anything creative in it. I want to do the assumption. I'm willing to do this. I've got a good earnest money. All of those things tell everybody what your story really is. Before you ever have a chance to open your mouth and write this biography of all the great things that you are, you're able to see that and put that out to them so that they're looking at it going, these guys are the ones we want to take. Yeah, I think that's where a lot of people could spend a little bit more time in this lull in the market and just go, you know what, let's tighten up our systems. Let's make it so that we pull a lever and everything happens from there. And it's all just a system that works its own self out. When they ask for this, we have that. Here's a contact for this. And the same thing happens with us on the leasing side and everything else, the property management, because we're looking for that package from the leasing company that says, hi, this is who we are. This is what we do. This is how we do it. This is why we dominate the market. Yeah. And if the guy says, why don't we just jump on a phone call? I don't really have a brochure to send you.
Bad use of time. Yeah, that means they're not prepared. And like you said, professionals want to work with professionals. And that's why the more you get up in the commercial space, the more the brokers are just looking for the right clients. It's why commercial brokers aren't usually answering residential brokers' calls, because they know they don't understand the game. It's not the same thing. It's not a one-off. Yeah. It's a long-term relationship.
Absolutely.
Yeah. That's really interesting. So what's your favorite, if you were going to do a ground-up build now, what would be just your personal favorite, depending on what you're getting out of it? Not money-wise, but what's your favorite to build?
It's always been industrial. And it's the easiest, right? The tenant's looking for 4 walls and a roof. The city's looking for basic communication. There's not a lot of fire, life, and safety. There's not a lot of distance from exit doors that you got to consider from 17 different hallways and how this works together. You're not dealing with elevators. It's a very simple process, and you can get start to finish in it pretty quickly. And then the cash flow is right. And then, just like we just discussed, your buyers and sellers are institutional grade. So you're not dealing with mom and pop and stuff like that. Not that there's anything wrong with that. You have to say that nowadays. Not that there's anything wrong with that. But the reality is, I want to quick clean everything. And this makes for quick clean everything. And then once I'm done, see, my problem is, Jonathan, I have HD ADD, high definition attention deficit disorder. So I see everything in 1080i.
Yeah.
But the minute the plans are drawn and the bank financing's in place, I'm bored. I'm done. That is the deal that I put together.
Yeah.
From there, I want to be able to set that off to the side, have it built, have it leased out, and have it make money. And so for me, it's creating the deals, and I can create more deals, and I can feed my ADHD better and faster with these kinds of projects. And they just click along. They're just like clockwork with the payments too, for the most part.
Yeah, but it's so interesting. When you talked about some of your industrial tenants, it's such a different look. I'm a LP in an industrial park in the Hamptons, which wasn't typically an industrial park area, but we bought, like, literally 35 years ago, my dad and some partners bought in this area right outside the town of Bridgehampton. And now most of our tenants are businesses who didn't want to pay to be on Main Street. And we've had good businesses in there, Plum TV, Soul Cycle, things like that. And that's what your new modern industrial tenant is. And then when I go out to San Diego, my sister lives in Carlsbad, and what we see in the industrial parks out there is like things like you were like, race car things, trampoline gyms, because you can get those huge spaces. That's such a win for everybody because they're paying for their own build out too. A lot of the times, like it's just a no brainer. I love it.
And the build out is minimal. The build out is really minimal. The other thing that you can do is your tenant improvements can typically be 100% depreciated over the term of the lease.
Yep.
You can't do that in a value add multifamily. Granted, you could take bonus depreciation, but we can do that on the industrial side too. And then the way that we structure them tax wise is we're able to get that write off in 5 years. We also have a lot of tenants that like to come in and they go, hey, listen, I need $100,000 worth of tenant improvement. And we say, would you like us to factor that into the lease at 8%
Exactly.
or 9%?
Yep,
So
right.
now we've raised the rents, we've raised the value of the building, we've given the tenants a reason to stay long term, because replicating all of that, moving the business, shutting it down, stopping that cash flow for 4 or 5 days or a week while you go get set up somewhere else is not easy. And people look at that and go, I'm going to lose $10,000 to move my place, or I can pay this guy $300 a month more.
And it's in your best interest as the fabricator of the whole project to be able to do the build outs, because then you're working with the same
Correct.
people who built it are now doing the build outs. You never, I don't know what's going to happen if a Verizon store comes in and they want to save some money one day. It's not going to be the same type of build out.
Yeah. And a lot of those, and the other thing is the tenants are more educated on what to expect. They know what they're getting. And I love industrial warehouse. Like I said, the very first project I got, I put a dance studio in one portion of it. And I think I spent $100,000 back in 2001 on the dance studio. They danced there for 11 years before they finally decided they were going to move on. So I tore everything out except for the bathrooms and the offices that I put in. And the next tenant moved in because they look at it. It's Billy Bob's transmission now, right?
Right.
It went from a dance studio. They're looking for a place to write out the invoice and a place to wash their hands. That's it.
Yeah.
It's just it's simpler.
Have you built self-storage as well?
I have done self-storage for others. That model, in my opinion, it's a great model, but I think it's a little bit more specialized with the way that you set up, the way that you operate, how you have to pay attention to that. I don't really feel that I can multitask into that space because I'd have to go learn it in order for me to invest in it. And I already do what I do pretty well. So I'm the old dog, new tricks kind of guy. I don't really feel like it.
Yeah, but that's a great point. I think self-storage, you're looking at the data and analytics of the drive-bys and all of the town growth and stuff, where industrial, you can fill industrial anywhere, I think. I don't know about what you think. If you do it the right way and you understand the market, there's always a market for that because that's just needed because it's unfinished space. And right now, like we were saying, your tenants could be anything from like a froyo place or gelato place to a metal fabricator.
Yep. And the other thing, when you look at, the self-storage space, there's a lot of, and even industrial, these things thrive in recessions.
Yeah.
More small businesses are started during a recession than any other time in history. A lot of it's because somebody's had a dream for a long time and their job just cut them loose and they thought, there's no time like the present. And so I look at those and I go, man, if I'm building multifamily during the upswing and I've got industrial for the downswing, I'm balancing myself in different asset classes for different reasons.
Yeah. Yeah. And I've always, depending on how you structure your industrial, I look at industrial a lot like a way where you as an owner, especially for what you do, you're a contractor. If you build a big industrial warehouse that's in an area where you don't have a space, now you're like just created yourself another free space that you can use, which is like one of the greatest things about commercial real estate, especially for mixed use. If you ever had that idea, like you wanted, like, I want to have a bookstore, like for my kids to manage. So I always am looking at mixed use because I know I can use one of the spaces. Have you ever done that? It's like a no-brainer.
It's like you read my mail.
Yeah.
I had to call the agent because he says, hey, I got an LOI coming in. I go, dude, I just got a shipment of doors on an apartment complex. I got nowhere for them. We can't do this deal for 4 months. It's definitely the thing. But the other thing that you've got to be disciplined enough to do is make the one business pay the other business because then your balance sheet looks like crap and you caused it.
Right.
So you got to prevent yourself from being your own worst enemy to solve one problem and light the whole forest on fire.
Yeah. So if you're talking to like new investors now who are trying to figure out how to get in, would you say that there's a way in for new investors to get into something that's more passive? Is it syndications? Is that the way in where people, because I think you're right. I think everyone is out there creating more jobs for themselves. They're like, I want to leave my 9 to 5. And then they get a 20 unit and they're working 2 times the amount of time for less money.
Yeah. The first question I ask investors is, what do you want out of the investment? I think there's really basically 3 things. You got cash flow, you've got tax benefits, or you've got appreciation. We dial into those. You pick what you want, you go into that, and then you look at it and go, are you at a point where you have enough capital that buying something and managing yourself replaces your job? If the answer is no, are you wanting to double your workload? I always ask people that, because then it gets them to understand that, you know what? I'd rather make $1,000 a month and have my weekends to go to the lake rather than make $1,000 a month, be working 45 hours a week for the man, still trying to figure this out and being frustrated by all of it. And when you really look at what you're able to do, people can always overload themselves trying to think that they can do it, but they'll always go look at Home Depot. Everywhere you look, there's professional grade. And guess what people buy? They buy the professional grade because somehow that's better, right? Why don't we look at that with that? So when people come in and look at this, if you think you want to do it on your own, buy a passive and buy an active, and then come back in 2 years and see which one you like more, right?
Yeah. It's so funny though, because I think just based on the proliferation of social media and how investing is, quote, popular, people think that the things that we're saying are not passive at all. People call that passive income. Right. They think like a 4 family is passive income, and you're like, you're literally going into the least passive investment you can, trying to self-manage a 4 family with holdover tenants with low rents. It's crazy. And that's what's so interesting. That's why I think, although we have exposed our age from saying how long we go back, the knowledge of going through that is what can really help, I think, new investors, which is part of the reason why I started this podcast, because it's just a differential of how you look at, have you been through a cycle? Do you understand diversification of assets? Do you understand what is actually passive, or when you have to pay to get the passivity a crazy amount? Or can you create the passivity another way, which is a lot of what we've been talking about?
And I tell people to do this. Take your tax return, divide it by 52 weeks in a year, divide it by 40 hours a week, and that's how much you make. Now, you work 5 days to get 2 off. So the math should be that your Saturdays and Sundays, or your weekend, or your downtime should be worth about 3 times what your work time is. So let's say you're making $100,000 a year. You do the math. That's $60 an hour, right? At $60 an hour, that means your off time is worth $180 an hour. Is somebody willing to do it for cheaper than that? Are they willing to put a warranty on it? But I got to be honest with you, Jonathan, I struggle with that too. We had a water heater go out, couldn't get a hold of the service guy. Finally got a hold of him. He wanted $1,100. It was on the 3rd floor, right? And I'm sitting there thinking, $1,100. The water heater's $350. And then I just have to talk myself through the math. And I think that when people really look at, why do you want real estate? I want it for passive income, then act like it, right? And we get all caught up in the romanticism of it, the DIY shows and all the pretty things we can do. But the reality is, you're trying to start a second business in all reality while still holding down a job and making the wife and kids happy. So you've got all these things that you have to do. And when you really think about it, real estate can do that for you, can do that way better than getting with a financial advisor and playing the stock market. So it really does have the ability to give you what you're looking for. You just have to understand, what are you really, truly looking for, and not be romantic about it.
Yeah. And I would go back to something you said at the beginning when you made the decision right away. You know what? Screw residential. Like, this is too much for me. I think everybody needs to be self-aware in the beginning about their journey. What do I really want to do? Do I really want to deal with Airbnb tenants complaining because I don't have enough salt shakers in the house?
Can opener doesn't work.
Exactly. Like my sister and I we're doing Airbnb before Airbnb existed. And we were both like, what is wrong with it? Like, I can't deal with the complaints. It's just not my personality. Right. And you knew right away, well, residential, there's just a lot going on. Every person needs to do that, or else they're going to fail at that investment. And like you said, and they're going to piss off their family and do a bunch of things because they didn't know. This is for the same reason they're like going to go, I don't know what I'm doing, I'm not going to go try to fix like a plumbing issue.
Right.
I don't know what I'm doing.
When you see me with power tools, go ahead and call the ambulance. Exactly. I'm going to need it.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm the same. I just know when I see you were saying like the DIY shows and there's all these investors who are like, oh, look, I did this whole thing myself. I'm like, that looks terrible to me. One, I suck at it. Two, I don't want the dust. Maybe that makes me sound like a prima donna, but I don't want to do that. I'm not good at that. Like, I know my skill set's not that. And I think it's just really interesting that you knew early at a young age, I'm just going commercial, like a lot less pains there.
To be clear, Jonathan, I've done it all. I've literally moved the house and put a basement underneath it. I've done it all. And so I know firsthand how painful it can be. Yeah. I know how hard it can be to do these things. And I like to say I have $1 for every mistake I made. And the money didn't come from the mistake, but it came from not doing it again and again. Yeah. If I hate remodels, don't take remodel jobs.
Right.
Find somebody you can refer people to and go forward with life. We get so caught up in being the answer to our own problems, which is one of the things that I think real estate solves for so many people when they play the game and really look at, just like you and I have been talking about, what is your skill set and what is your desire?
Yeah. And there's a big difference even when you have big construction company, you can decide this is the type of job that I like to take on as a company, but I'm not going to invest in this asset. Just like you're saying about self-storage. You may build a self-storage facility for someone because that's a good deal for you on the construction end. But like the asset, you don't want the asset. And that's where I think you can start to see that's your preference. And everybody needs to figure out their preference. Of course, it's harder when you haven't done any deals. But I think that people are just salivating to be an investor. And like we said, there's a lot of money out there, but they're making a lot of bad decisions.
And everybody tells you to focus on your why. Why do you want to do real estate? Nobody tells you to focus on the how. Nobody tells you to focus on the what. I want to do real estate because I want to have financial freedom. Great. How are you going to do that?
Yeah.
And then if you wind up building an Airbnb empire, and I know some people that have an Airbnb, they got 20 of them, right? Yeah. And they're just as busy as you could ever think they'd want to be. But how do they, now they have more money than they were making at their job, but how do they pull themselves out of that and let that thing run with other people there? It's really dependent on them. And so they've just really built themselves into a cage.
Yeah. And you talked about the why. It's one of the last things we'll hit on before we hop off. But the why is so interesting because most people answer the why with one answer, but the real why is 6 more whys deep. I'd like to replace my job. Why? Oh, because I'd like to spend more time with my family. Why? Because they're annoyed at me for being in my job. Why? Because my parents went there. You keep going down the layers. Right. The true why is 7 layers deep. And that's why, again, it's like a philosophy. They're like, hey, read this one book. It's surface level until you really figure out. And a lot of that takes years. Like you said, you've been at it 27 years figuring out which jobs you want to take, which assets are smart investments for you and your family, what makes sense. But like people have to be ready for the journey. It's a short-term, long-term thing.
Absolutely. And I think that I think it was Elon Musk or somebody said, you severely overestimate what you can do in a year. You severely underestimate what you can do in 10. And I think a lot of people, especially with the quantity of people that we've seen jump into real estate now, they're looking at it as a get rich now thing when it really is a get rich, but it's one of those overnight successes that takes 20 years to percolate.
Yeah, let's get rich and stay rich.
It's a great way to say it, right? Yeah,
absolutely. Awesome, man. This has been a great conversation. Is the best place for people to get info about you at shannonrobnett.com?
Yep. They can go to my website. They can get everything from my book list, book an appointment with me, talk about what we're doing. They can see our job site cameras. All those things are available on there, plus a lot of other videos for teaching and training and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, your YouTube channel's got a lot of videos, so there's a lot of good info out there. We will link to all of your links in the show notes. Shannon, it was an absolute pleasure. I love the conversation, even though now everybody knows we're like a little bit old. But
like you said, the great chins kind of gave it away for the beginning.
Yeah, there's nothing you can do about that.
Jonathan, and I appreciate your mission and why you're doing this to help educate other people. I think that's so important. I've said it often. We could have avoided 2008 if we'd have had a more intelligent investor group.
Yeah. Appreciate it, man. All right. I look forward to staying connected with you. This has been episode 47 of Zen and the Art of Real Estate Investing with my guest, Shannon Robnett. Thanks, Shannon. We'll see everybody next week. I hope you enjoyed that episode of Zen and the Art of Real Estate Investing with me, Jonathan Green.
And I just want to remind you, and this is always an uncomfortable part, I don't want you to think that I'm begging for you to like, subscribe, follow, do whatever you have to do for the podcast, leave a 5-star review. But if you like the podcast and you think it adds value in the real estate investing sphere, then just do me a personal favor. Like the podcast, follow it, share it when you can with your friends, and be so kind as to write a 5-star review if you believe it deserves a 5-star review up against what else is out there. I would really appreciate it, and I hope you keep listening.